Greetings, Starfighters. Welcome to the next episode of Shameless Cashgrab, the first episode to be released since I started a Patreon. There will be a link to it in the show notes, of course, and we'll also show one on screen right about here. And in case you're wondering why the pointing finger is on this side, is because if I do it like this, it opens the door to a bunch of dick jokes, and I'm not interested. So, next movie for Shameless Cashgrab, the next vampire movie. That may not actually have vampires in it, based on the plot description on the back. This looks to be another case where the vampire connection is tenuous at best, like it was with Atom Age Vampire. In fact, this plot seems to share some admittedly superficial similarities with Atom Age Vampire, so I'm probably not going to be a remake or anything like that. But yes, Nightmare Castle from 1965.
Alright, so, Nightmare Castle, 1965. Plot summary courtesy of IMDb. A sadistic count tortures and murders his unfaithful wife and her lover, then removes their hearts from their bodies. Years later, the count remarries and the new wife experiences nightmares and hauntings. The ghosts of the slain return to exact their bloody revenge until their hearts are destroyed. There is so much in this movie I am just not qualified to talk about with any sort of authority. We have sadism, emotional abuse, gaslighting, all certainly useful elements in telling a horror story to be sure, and this movie certainly uses them more effectively than one would expect given it was made in the 60s and on a tight budget. Heck, it uses it better than some movies made now. Now, honestly, a decent chunk of the way into the film, my only real complaints about it were fairly minor, and some of those can probably be blamed on Mill Creek's transfer of it rather than the film itself, such as the abrupt start to the credits or the less than stellar dub. A better dub than Atom Age Vampire, so that's a point in this movie's favor, but still. Another point is how it doesn't try to make the mad scientist, Dr. Aerosmith. No, arrow like as in bow and arrow. The movie doesn't portray him as a man wronged. Yes, his wife cheats on him, but from scene one you can see why. The guy's an asshole, and while she has money, divorce wasn't quite so easy to get in 1965 when this was filmed, let alone the late 1800s where this movie is taking place. No specific year is given, but it's the late 1800s. One could make the argument the torture segment of the film goes on too long, and I certainly can't blame anyone who would, just completely check out if they decide to check this movie out after this episode. But at least it doesn't take up the entire movie, so really that puts this movie one up above pretty much anything Eli Roth has ever made. Why, yes, I did just make 2 episodes in a row where I threw shade at Eli Roth. I stand by that. Only thing of his that I've seen that I even remotely liked was the fake movie trailer he made for 2005's Grindhouse. Back on topic, in terms of Just Myself, I think the filmmakers ended it just soon enough. The torture segment, I was actually worried it would go on longer than it did, but it didn't. There was also a brief moment there where I thought it was going to go the sexual assault route, but thankfully it averted that too. As the summary from IMDb covers the first act of the film pretty succinctly, I can actually afford to skip ahead a little bit to the bulk of the story. For starters, the remarrying mentioned there. Well, the mad scientist, who I will call Stephen instead of Dr. Aerosmith because I am not strong enough to resist jokes that obvious, has now married his dead wife's twin sister. Okay, the movie says it's her stepsister, but come on. Seeing as both women, Muriel and Jenny respectively, are played by the same actress, why not just say twins? Anyway, prior to this, we learned that the house's maid, Solange, was actually Stephen's lover this whole time. So his anger at Muriel's affair is as hypocritical as it is predictable. Toxic masculinity, like we see on display with this guy, is at its core very much a case of no laws for the lions, but many for the oxen, to borrow a phrase. While Stephen is describing his plan to drive the already mentally fragile Jenny over the edge into full-on insanity, there are several jumps that I noticed. I'm thinking that maybe in addition to coming from a VHS tape, because the transfer really does look like it comes from a VHS tape, this version of the film was also trimmed. from a TV airing, perhaps? That would be unfortunate. The jumps do mess with the film's tension more than a fair amount. What follows this is some really well-done sections with stuff both in your face and subtle that starts to drive Jenny mad. And while we already know that much of it is the work of her evil mad scientist husband, there's an implication that something supernatural might be going on too. Which was spoiled by my plot summary, but go with this. I kind of don't want to say much more about it. I actually think you folks should check this one out. Just, don't get the Mill Creek version. You won't have to worry about so many jump cuts. Think of this movie as being like that Robert Zemeckis horror movie from 2000, What Lies Beneath, but without a major plot reveal being given away in the damn trailer, and yes, I'm still annoyed about that. I mean, it's a lot like that movie in many ways, but rather than being bland, it has a kind of charm you might find in a higher-end MST3K movie. Like I believe I alluded to earlier, many of the movie's weaknesses can be attributed to the time it was made and the likely budget they had to work with. The dub does it no favors either, especially as it doesn't seem to have been necessary. More often than not, the lip movements actually match the words, which leads me to believe this dub wasn't because the original actors weren't speaking English, but because they were speaking English with an accent. Oh, and as for why this movie is on this set, its vampire connection, a lesser-known Kermit the Frog song, is the way Stephen restores the appearance of youth to Solange, that being with his murdered wife's blood, and he plans to do the same thing with Jenny's blood. That's a rather flimsy connection, if you ask me. I mean, the needles he used don't even go into their neck, it goes into their arms. But I suppose it does make a certain amount of sense why one would put this in a vampire movie set. Okay, no, not really. It's just blood. Lots of horror movies use blood and aren't considered vampire movies, but with the aforementioned supernatural elements at play, this one's probably a better fit for the set than Adam H. Vampire was. Random thoughts I had while watching the film. As I mentioned before, this looks like it was taken off a VHS tape, because I swear on my life, there were moments that made me want to go for the tracking button on the remote, just sort of like by instinct. Man, remember those? I imagine most of my audience remembers VCRs. They didn't stop making VHS tapes that long ago, and you can still buy VCRs, they're just harder to find and more expensive than they were at their peak. I kind of doubt Solange's old age makeup would have looked that convincing even in 1965, but maybe that's me. Okay, here's one issue with the movie that I just can't let slide. Why did the ghost/zombie things at the end tell the mad scientist what he'd need to do to destroy them? I mean, he doesn't do it, for reasons that would be spoilery, but still, why risk it? Final verdict. Is Nightmare Castle an effective horror movie? Actually, yeah. Especially for the time and budget, as I keep saying. But seeing as this is supposed to be a vampire set, I am reluctant to rank this one high on the list come the season wrap-up episode because, as you may have gathered from my talking about it, there's not one single goddamn vampire in this entire movie. Seriously, how the hell am I going to rank this? I'm open to suggestions. Leave them in the comments. Of course, again, now that I've asked for comments, I'm not going to get any. As for the next film, we go back to the 1980s for the first time since the absolute worst movie from the last set. Join us next time for 1988's Prime Evil.
With that shameless plugging out of the way, shameless plugging on a show called Shameless Cashgrab. Fuck. Sorry, I screwed that up. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to keep going. We can just edit this.
Yeah, we can edit.
There also seem to be some superficial plot summaries. I'm just going to go ahead and leave that in. Plot similarities. Yes, I can talk. I've only been doing a YouTube show for 2 years now? Nightmare Castle, 1965. I'm going to stop before we have to do a fifth take. And scene.
Isn't that only the third?
I know. That's that was part of the joke.